With us again, folks, is Paul Craig Roberts, an esteemed political analyst. He has quite a working knowledge of how government really works, often against our best interests. And Paul, some of what's going on now is just insane, or at least it would have been considered insane just a few years ago, how they're trying to keep Trump off the ballot. What's your take on that?
It's the most amazing thing. It's like just imagine that the entire Colorado State Supreme Court, every judge on that court, of course, they're all Democrat. They all ruled that the state of Colorado can take Trump off the ballot for the 2024 election because he's an insurrectionist.
Nothing convicted of it, though.
Well, that's the whole point, isn't it? There's no evidence he's an insurrectionist. He hasn't been tried. He hasn't been convicted. The case may never go to trial. How is it that jurists who are qualified to be on a state Supreme Court are so totally ignorant of basic legal principles? They're banning a person on the basis, first of all, of a law that they have no power whatsoever to enforce, because the insurrection clause is a federal issue. Federal law cannot be enforced by states. It has to be. So they're totally ignorant of that. And then they simply assume that he's guilty because of an accusation.
Paul,
In other words, we don't need a trial. We accused him, and that means he's guilty.
no,
So
you say they're ignorant. Are they willfully ignorant? Can they really be that ignorant?
I think they must be ignorant, because why would you make a fool of yourself like that?
They don't care. By the time they do damage with the bad publicity, then it's reversed, supposedly, hopefully, by the Supreme Court. But by then, some of the mud sticks. Isn't that the whole approach to getting Trump?
Well, I can understand that would be, but still, if I was a state Supreme Court judge, I would want to be respected by the lawyers who came to court. I would want to be respected by the bar associations. I wouldn't want to appear like a complete stupid fool who doesn't know anything. But that's how these judges appear. They think that they have authority over federal law. They don't. And they think that an accusation constitutes conviction. It doesn't. So, and it gets even worse, because the state attorney general or secretary of state, whatever the woman is, she says, "Oh, the judges made the exact correct rule, and I'm taking Trump off the ballot." Well, she hasn't got any power to do that. And now the same thing has happened in Maine, only without the judges. I guess the judges in Maine didn't want to look like idiots like the ones in California, where they clearly look like stupid fools that aren't. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But in Maine now, again, it's the Secretary of State, or
Secretary of State.
yeah, I guess that who has control of elections. She says she's taking Trump off. Well, she's got no right to do that. Why does she think she has a right to do that? And it just sort of blows your mind. You see, their case rests on a provision in the 14th Amendment that a person who was an insurrectionist against the United States government couldn't be an official of the government. Well, it's up to Congress to enforce this provision. It is nothing states can do. States have no ability to enforce federal law. And so they don't know this. So how do they get in that position?
But Paul, to make
Hmm?
this work, they're also depending on the ignorance of large proportions of the public who don't know the difference. And they figure some of this will stick with the public, that they have a right to take them off the ballot. And as we know, the education system now is more propaganda than it is enlightenment. So a big portion of the public believes that they have that right. They're depending on the ignorance of the public, are they not?
Well, yes, but I think they're part of the same ignorance. And I'm beginning to think the law schools no longer teach law. They teach how to get people that aren't woke.
Yeah.
I don't think you can learn law going to a law school anymore. Clearly, none of these judges learned it. Now, I don't know if the two secretaries of state, the one in Colorado and the one in Maine, if they have law degrees or not, but clearly they are not adequately educated to be in those kinds of positions.
Do you see
But
any possibility that the Supreme Court will not strike this down and keep Trump off the ballots? Do you,
no, they can't. If the Supreme Court rules that an accusation is conviction, then we know we're totally lawless, that everything is lost.
yeah.
That law means nothing. It's just whoever has enough power to enforce his will. So law will simply rest entirely on the exercise of power. We have there'll be no more rule of law. It'll be something that power exercises. So now, if Trump was convicted, the court might rule using that provision, but I think not, because it's not directed at a presidential candidate who's the nominee. In other words, the Supreme Court would know, look, if we rule this, everybody knows we're canceling the primary system that selects candidates. Now, what's the most important thing? What will that do to the Supreme Court's reputation, which isn't very good anyway? So if they rule that, I think the consequences would just be disastrous. Nobody would pay any attention to the Supreme Court. It would just be an obvious political weaponized rule. It's not anything that bears any resemblance to kind of having a country that operates under a rule of law, because it would destroy the rule of law. People wouldn't believe it. Oh, okay, we nominated him. He's who we all want to vote for, and you're telling us we can't.
This is
So where is this democracy you talk about?
this is banana republic stuff.
It's the exercise of power, like in the Dark Ages, the early Middle Ages. A feudal lord could just grab somebody, throw him in the dungeon. He didn't have to give any accountability to anything. It just rested on force, power. And the whole effort of the entire development of English common law was to prevent that type of activity. And it really wasn't until 1680 in England that it was established that the king is subject to law. Well, we inherited that as a British colony. And that concept is the basis of the United States. So if we end up again where law is simply a weapon in the ruler's hand, he applies it however he likes, then you don't have a rule of law. Now, it's entirely possible that the people in the law schools are so stupid and ideological, they don't realize that. It's entirely possible. Because, what happens to ideologues, which I think are everywhere now in academia. I don't know if there's any scholarly departments left. Ideologues they're fanatics and they're carried away by their cause. And that's all that's important, is the cause. And so they can tear up entire traditions that hold things together. And you just end up in chaos. And if you tear up a rule of law that holds government accountable to law, then you've got anarchy. And the law loses all meaning. It's just whoever can swat down somebody else. It resides in power.
And then both parties could do it to each other. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the party in power would be hard to get out,
Right.
except through violent revolution, violent war. There would actually have to be, for the first time, a real civil war. What they called the Civil War in the 19th century was not a civil war, because a civil war is when you fight for control of the government.
Hmm.
But the South had withdrawn, had their own government. They had no interest in controlling Washington.
Yeah.
So I don't, right, that they call that a civil war already shows how corrupt understanding is, how corrupt scholarship is. It wasn't a civil war.
Well, the Declaration of Independence states that people have a right to form their own government.
Right.
They,
That's exactly.
when
That's
their current government is oppressive and failing to address their needs.
I know.
The Declaration of Independence states you have a right to do that.
Well, that's the point the South made over and over. And they said, no, we're not rebels. We're just doing what you and we did against King George. And you're not representing us. You're representing Northern industry, and you want to make us pay for your industrialization. And we don't agree to that. And so the whole thing was about the tariff.
Yeah, which is a topic I'd like to get in with you at another time, Paul. It's a fascinating take on it because most people think it was solely about slavery, and it was a lot more complicated than that. But Paul, you've been saying for more than a year now that they will not allow Trump to become president one way or the other. Now, if this latest assault fails on getting them off the ballot, what's next?
Well, didn't you see what Robert Kagan, the notorious neoconservative, the husband of Victoria Nuland? You see what he wrote in the Washington Post recently?
Very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, he said, well, we'll just have to whack him. That means assassinate him.
Yeah.
And the neoconservatives are talking about that. So are the woke liberals and the Democrats. We have to get rid of him. And so if what Kagan said was in the Washington Post, now this is a newspaper allowing somebody to say the solution to Trump is to kill him. Now, why aren't they arrested, called before courts? They're threatening to kill a president who's protected by the Secret Service. You can see that already the law is lost, because for the Washington Post to print, what if I were to say right now that we should X somebody? I'd be guilty of advocating murder, and FBI be knocking on my door.
At the
So,
very least, terroristic threats.
yeah, but here the Washington Post can print something, and this guy's wife is the Undersecretary of State, and he can advocate the solution to Trump is to kill him, and nothing happens.
And there's no outrage. I haven't heard any coverage on the cable news networks on this.
Yeah, because all the Democrats agree, yes, let's kill him. So it looks like what I said, they already agreed with that. And I don't know what they're going to do, but I will. This is an interesting question you raise. What is the solution? Well, clearly Biden is useless. And all the polls show Trump is so far ahead of him that they cannot steal this election. It just couldn't be, they wouldn't be able to cover it up, even with the insouciant public that we have. So what could they do? Well, here's what they could do. Biden can resign. Camilla becomes president. She appoints Hillary vice president. Camilla resigns. Hillary is president. And Hillary competes against Trump and steals the election again. So clearly, Hillary would get far more votes than Biden. The wipeout wouldn't be the same as Biden Trump as Hillary Trump.
In other words, it'd be less suspicious. They could make that fly that Hillary.
Yeah, there wouldn't be such a huge gap in the polls that they could make that. They'd find some way to explain it away. Well, Trump's voters were too confident and they didn't all go vote. See, I can think up all kinds of reasons for them, but they can think up their own. So this is something that I've been sort of toying with, and I said, well, I better not write it because maybe the Democrats hadn't thought of it. But you see how it would work.
Yeah, yeah.
Biden simply says, well, I'm having memory troubles and actually I'm tired of all this struggle anyhow. And people calling me names and charges being brought against me. And so he would resign. Camilla would be president. She would pardon him and Hunter and the whole Biden family, his brother and everybody else involved. And then she would make Hillary the vice president, and then she resigns. And they make a deal with her, and he accepts it, and maybe she becomes Secretary of State or something. And
But Paul, picking up on what you said before about we're at a point now people are talking about a second civil war. If they pulled that, what would the reaction be among the Trump supporters and much of the other public in general, seeing that it stinks to high heaven, the manipulation? I mean, what would happen then in terms of civil discord? And we're not predicting violence or anything like that, but I'm saying, this would be such an extreme maneuver. There would have to be a drastic reaction in some form.
Well, I posted today a piece by Howard what's his name? Kunstler. And he says it'll really break into a civil war. My view is that the American people, the Trump supporters, I don't know that they're at that stage because they can still pay their rent and still buy groceries. And to go to war takes a lot of effort, a lot of organization they just don't have. So what would most likely be the case, I think, would be they would just lose all confidence in the system. And they would no longer have any belief in the country. So if half the population has zero belief in any institution, and half of the other half have just got here walking across the border, they're coming in 250,000 a month. then who believes in anything? And so, how is there a country? How is there even a government? In other words, I think just all social cooperation would collapse. And it might eventually lead to a civil war, but I think the first thing would just be people would write the country off. They would just write it off.
They'd write it off, and the country would go through a slow and steady disintegration.
Yeah, things just cease functioning. If there's no belief system, what do you have? It's chaos. And I think already enough has happened. Enough of the population has caught on that 9/11 was a hoax, that Oswald killing Kennedy was a hoax, that the charges against Trump are a hoax, that both the last elections were stolen. I think it's just no belief in the system already. And that the Democrat shenanigans would simply just leave no belief. It would just simply not be there. The whole system is shattered because there's nobody believes in it. And you can't have a country that people don't believe in the institutions. I mean, look at the FBI. Who would ever believe a single case the FBI ever brought again in history?
Yeah.
I can't imagine being on any jury that has an FBI case that I would just simply say, no, not guilty, because the Bureau has proved it's got no integrity.
Yeah.
So why should I believe what it says in court? I mean, we know it has no integrity. So enough people are catching on to that. It takes one. So when the system proves it's got no integrity anywhere, I mean, we know the media has zero. I mean, the media, good God, Congress has got no integrity. We know that the Biden administration's got none. Look, they're defending genocide in Palestine. All the lies they told us about Ukraine. Where is the integrity? You can't find it. So a country without integrity what is it?
Well, Paul, an even bigger question here, overriding the whole picture here, is if there is this kind of social decline and non-belief in the system, does that decline reflect in terms of the economy and the military? And if the military declines, what happens to the U.S.? Are we then taken over by another power? We lose our place in the world at our peril? What happens? If the country disintegrates socially, do we also disintegrate militarily and economically?
Of course.